Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back for the open session, which is going to be led by Asha Palmer. She's the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer for Converge and Convercent by OneTrust. So we're excited to have all of our speakers. And again, once again, thank you to our sponsors, Convercent by OneTrust, CAQ, Compliance Line, FTI Consulting, Navex Global, and Vault Platform. Welcome, Asha.
Thank you. Hi, Florence. All right. Well, I am very excited for this discussion because I think, the elephant in the room is that many of us probably many of you in the room think that all of us are competitors. So what would competitors talk about at the same time? But we actually are friends and really are invested in making the ethics and compliance community better and improving, the methodologies that we use, the methods that we use, and really propelling us forward. And that's what this conversation is about. You guys have had 2 great days of something that will push us forward, which are the ESG efforts that are within each of our companies and that we see happening around us in the world. And so I'm going to just moderate a discussion amongst our esteemed panelists about how do we, yes, Nick, you, about how do we actually operationalize a lot of the things that we've discussed today. And I've gotten a chance to sort of review all the questions that have been asked and really just want to kind of bring into summation some of the pressing issues that I see that are arising throughout the conversation over the last 2 days. So with that, I'm going to present my first question to the panel here about E, S, and G. There were a lot of questions throughout each of your sessions about, should we be dealing with the E separately from the S, separately from the G, or should it be ESG? And are there pros and cons to sort of dealing with them as the bucket that's kind of been the latest 3-letter acronym that we're all seeing? Or should we really be prioritizing or strengthening, one over the other? So maybe we'll use the raise hand function amongst the panel because there's a lot of us, but who wants to sort of tackle that issue first? All right, Nick, you go for it.
So I think we're just kind of talking about one thing. And I think that one thing is going to manifest itself differently in each different business, depending on what business you're in and what kind of matters most for you. I think as we dove into our particular session and a lot of the feedback we got from folks, particularly offline, a lot of light bulbs went on because we're really a lot further down the road than we think. So, I mean, everybody who's coming here at least has some of that G going on, right? We probably all have a heart for the S piece, and whether you're in field services or you're an energy company or whether you're even just a straight services or software company, there's probably some E things that you're doing. So at some level, these acronyms or this acronym is not really a reimagining of anything. It's just kind of putting a label on some stuff that we're already doing, and it's just sort of partitioning out some of our efforts that already exist within our company.
Yeah, and I think Karen and Rodolfo, in your section, in your session, you really highlighted, starting somewhere. So, and defining your priorities. So, Rodolfo, do you want to sort of talk about where people should start or prioritize?
Sure, and the same point that that was just made in terms of the first thing is that they should be looked at one program. Holistically, you're going to address many items. There is this journey into sustainability for a company. It's how to address risks and opportunities as companies become better corporate citizens. There is a ton also of overlap. There are items that you can see them as in the governance bucket. You can see this as in the social bucket. In the end, this is really meaningless. The main thing is to set what are the material items for the company. So what are the priorities? If you think about your business, what are the items that can have an impact to enterprise value? And an impact to enterprise value might be because you might get fined if you do something that is wrong. It might be because you might have your corporate reputation, your license to operate, not being available to you anymore just because you're not behaving the way that society wants you to behave. But think about this as everything has in the end has an impact to the value of an organization. As you define those priorities that are going to be in different buckets, then you have clarity in terms of what you have to do in terms of putting together a plan that is going to address those issues. That for an oil and gas companies are going to have items like environmental impact, but it's also going to have health and safety on the social side because it's critical for a company to not have accidents. It's dangerous kind of work that they do to extract oil from the ground, for example, and gas. So it's just saying, set your priorities, understand what you should be managing. From there, understand what your stakeholders value, because it's a two-way kind of avenue when you're talking about how to define priorities, because their priorities impact also your enterprise value. So understand what the priority should be, and from there, you build a holistic program that is going to address all the risks and opportunities that emerge from these items.
That's great. Giovanni, were you going to add to that?
Yeah, the question was whether we should start with E, right? That was kind of the core of it.
Well, where do you start? Or should they have individualized focuses versus sort of the combined focus that we see in the market?
Yeah, I mean, part of how we talked about this is if you're going to have an ESG program that you as an E&C professional are part of, it's probably going to look a little bit, maybe a lot different from how you run your current programs, because it's going to be more of like some coalition building, right? Because if you're, maybe policies you run by HR or InfoSec or something like that, but your speak up culture you're running, there are a bunch of programs that your E&C team runs. This is something that needs to encompass the whole organization. It's something that thankfully the whole organization cares about, but you're going to be doing some of that coalition building more than just kind of running it on your own. And I think that if that's the case, I think you kind of start wherever you are. And, we suggest you start by getting a handle on, like, what are you doing? Like, do you have an environmental health and safety division of, 50 people who are on that all the time? You probably have some good E stuff. So why don't you start pulling that into a report or getting some of those data? I think if you're in compliance, you're probably pretty good on a bunch of the G stuff, right? You're probably doing governance and you have the stuff there. And I think you got to kind of set your baseline. But I think that, like, when you do this and you take a step back and say, well, no, I didn't call that social. I just called that e-learning. Or, I didn't call that governance. That's just kind of what we do because, that's the right thing to do. When you put it into this framework and kind of put on your ESG glasses, maybe we should get some of those, put on your ESG glasses, you'll see that a bunch of this stuff is already going on. So then you start there and say, okay, we're great on governance. We're getting a B in social, and we're, maybe at a D in environmental. But are we really? We're not a mining company. We're a remote work technology company. Well, maybe not having 85 environmental initiatives is okay for you. But I think you got to start where you are, and then you figure out, okay, what's the gap, right? What's the headroom? Well, we should really be doing more on a social basis. Our representation isn't as great, or whatever, and then you step that up. But I think that, if you, maybe part of what I'm saying is if you just start with E, you're probably going about it backwards. Maybe you should start with G. Maybe that's a way to do it because we're E&C pros and we're doing some of that. Or just start with, like, figuring out what you got. Ask some smart people who care around the organization and get your baseline. And what I love about this is not, guidance on GDPR or, EU privacy that just launched and we got to get it done by the end of the year. This is everyone's trying to figure it out. So you can figure it out within your domain and then step it forward from there.
Yeah, that's great. Karen, you were going to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to add to it, and really good points on all of that, right? And I think we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but yeah, they are a little bit in silos, right? When you think about companies, so the E, the S, and the G, sometimes they are in silos, and that's because it requires a certain level of expertise within your company, right? And I think that's okay, right? Because sometimes you have sustainability or environmental health and safety. They have a really good handle on environmental, right? So you don't have to pull it off their table, right? Or off their plate, right? We just need to bring it into the ESG fold. And that's true for S, right? Where a lot of it lives under human resources, right? And a lot of it, the other aspects live under finance maybe, right? So I think aligning yourself, and I keep seeing questions about metrics, right? And I personally, always believe that if you can align yourself with the frameworks that are out there, right? So yeah, back to what Rodolfo was saying in terms of do a materiality assessment, determine what's material to your business, and then run with that, right? But essentially, look at a lot of the standards bodies out there, right? We just saw the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, the Value Reporting Foundation. A lot of the standards are starting to come together now, right? The financial standards, the sustainability accounting standards. So that's fantastic news for all of us, right? That means that we'll have kind of one, hopefully we're getting down to maybe a few standards versus kind of this mush of stuff that we're all supposed to comply to, right? And all these metrics out there. So I think the industry as a whole is starting to come together to define what standards to follow. But I really, hugely recommend, go to the SASB website, sasb.org. I know it's the Value Reporting Foundation, the Global Reporting Initiative. Take a look at those, right? Start understanding what people are really thinking about in terms of metrics, and then determine what's material to your business, and then start moving forward there. So I just wanted to add that point, and hopefully that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can just add, I think if you step one layer back from all of that, because trust me, I remember the first time I downloaded TCFD, and
yeah.
I was like, oh my God, is it really 160 pages, right? Or whatever. And so I think sometimes that can be intimidating, but I do think at another level, as ethics and compliance professionals, we are the owners of the code of conduct, right? Let's start there. In the code of conduct, we make statements about environment, what we do with the environment,
Exactly.
sustainability, privacy,
Right.
human rights, diversity, equity, anti-corruption, supply chain. We make all of these commitments in our code. And what I see ESG as is really the evidence that we are meeting the commitments that we are making. And so if you were to provide evidence of the fact that you care about the environment, or you are taking, what would that be? And then kind of begin to metrics against that. I think that's particularly important if you're not having pressures from investors, or you're not having, you don't have a regulatory force that's enforcing something. It could be a good place to start to get the company really excited about it, because words are not quite enough anymore.
I think a lot of us take this approach that we need to do this bottom up thing, and we got to download this standard, and we have to comb through all this thing and translate that into our business. That's absolutely a valid approach to this whole game. But another kind of shortcut to it is to look at some other companies that are maybe public versions of your company or bigger, and see what they're doing in their statements. And you can creatively borrow from a lot of these places, and that can at least give you some framework and some kind of archetype that you can start, filling in the gaps for. So that fire that you saw was some of the fire that you were just spitting, Asha, because that was spot on to me. So I love it.
That's great. I want to talk about, and any of the panelists, please chime in. There's a link for this session that's different than some of the links we've seen, and that's enterprise risk and ESG, right? And ERM and ESG. Can the panelists really elaborate on why ESG strategy, approach, programs, reports, all of those things should really be looked at as the lack of having it being an enterprise risk, or something that you merge with your enterprise risk management system? Why is that an important mindset? Or maybe I should ask, is it an important mindset? Rodolfo.
I can jump in there because we talk about this with our clients, and we've been talking about ESG as risk management for a long time now. We say nowadays that it's more than just risk management, because we are in a transition period. So we say that it's the management of risks and the management of opportunities that emerge from this transition to a more sustainable economy, and what companies have to do to play a role in this in the new space. But the way that we describe to clients, from the materiality assessment to understand and build up the program, is basically this: understand the factors that can have a negative impact to enterprise value. As I was mentioning before, it can be from making a mistake in the environmental side, or in the social side, with maybe employees that end up getting a fine because of labor relationships, or because of some kind of environmental disaster that you cause. It can be also in terms of the reputation of the firm. And we have clients that if they don't behave the way they're supposed to behave, I'm sure that their consumers are going to stop buying their products. And that can have a clear negative impact to enterprise value. If you think about this, these are risks related to the business that has to be managed by the board. The expectation from shareholders is that's going to be managed by the board and by the C-suite of the organization. It has to be part of the enterprise management. The same way that in the G side, it has to be part of the enterprise management risk of their organizations. Basically, think about this as a company has to behave in a certain way. If you don't behave in a certain way, there's going to be a negative impact to value. And this negative impact can be significant. I was mentioning an example yesterday about Wynn Resorts with the sexual scandal with the CEO, and you can blend that into maybe an S risk, a G risk at the company. Stock price went down by 20% over a short period of time. So then comes the expectation from the company shareholders about any investors, if you're talking about a private company, many of them PE-backed, that these are going to be priorities for the organization.
Yeah, I think Lisa wanted to add, and then I'll go back to you, Giovanni. Go ahead, Lisa.
No, actually, no, sorry. The time passed, so it was from a prior question. Let's keep going.
Okay, go ahead, Giovanni, and then we'll come back to your comment, Lisa.
Yeah, happy to back up for your comment, Lisa. But yeah, so I want to just provide a little bit of a different perspective because there's so much flexibility in this ESG piece. So if we're talking about should you reference this to risk, I think the answer is it depends. So here's what it depends on. What is the culture of your company and the leadership and budget and attention from middle management that is going to get someone interested in this? Because the plus side for tying it to risk is we know that language. And if you have a very risk conscious company, right, you're in finance and they're always, trying to watch the impact on the balance sheet or whatever. If that's a language people speak all the time, then boom, slam the ESG discussion into a risk. And all the things that Rodolfo said, those are all very valid, right? There is risk that the stock price goes down. There is risk for an environmental fine. There is risk, that flows through into, your pocketbook if, employees revolt over your representation or,
right,
how you treat women or whatever. So there's definitely risk there, and you can have this conversation that way. I think people might be in a different situation. It's probably not within your team and the people you get lunch with on the compliance team, but if you've been banging your head against the wall with the board and with your CEO about, hey, there's a big risk that we got to comply with this regulation, or hey, you know what, this is coming down the pike, let's get ahead of it. And when you talk risk, they go like this, except they don't have headphones on. If that's what's happening, then you got to talk about this a different way, because that's part of what we're doing as leaders. Leadership is language, leadership is influence. And if we want to influence people to get on the train with this, then you might have to talk about this as opportunity. And you might have to talk to your CEO, right? And like we talked about this in one of our sessions about like how you talk to the board. You need to talk to your audiences different ways. Your CEO might be a software guy and he wants to build the future and software is going to eat the world. Well, tell him how what he cares about in growth and opportunity and taking over the market, ESG does that. And then if your CIO or your cybersecurity guy is all about risk, say, hey, you know what, this is actually going to help us with our risk. So I think that, putting it into a risk framework or, putting into that audit, we speak the language. If other people around us speak the language, then that can be very fluent. If you've been running into a wall talking about risk, you might want to say, hey, you know what? I'm not just a risk person. Exactly. I'm a compliance and ethics professional. Ethics isn't just about risk. It's about doing things right. And when you do things right, you can get growth. You can get advancement, in your market. You can get innovation. People care about innovation. So this can help all of those things, right? Diversity fuels innovation. Governance keeps you from, kind of tripping over yourself so you can innovate. So you can translate ESG into a bunch of these different languages. So, consider the risk language, but also maybe something else.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important to phrase it as risk and opportunity, which we were, you were just articulating, because quite frankly, we have customers that say, I'm only in this because it gets me a better rate on a loan in California. Mm-hmm. And that may be where people start their ESG journey because there's an opportunity there, and that you have to acknowledge where your business is. And it might be an opportunity that pushes them to make the efforts. Desiree, you want to add to this?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm off muted. Yeah, great, thanks. No, so I was just going to add that. I mean, I think a number of organizations are not just seeing ESG risk as sort of siloed and ESG, they're actual business risks. And so they're attempting to manage this as part of the broader, broader strategy, incorporating it into strategy, incorporating it into the broader risk management, and not as a separate ESG risk management, but risk management broadly speaking. And I just thought maybe it would be helpful to point the audience, to the extent they're interested, to a publication that came out a few years ago by COSO and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. They published a resource, quite an extensive one, which talks about how to go about integrating, ERM and ESG. And it kind of walks you through strategy, that whole process through to reporting out, and how risk management and sort of the other functions in the business can work together. So just point that out to the group, to the extent they're kind of interested in, taking a look at it. It's a fairly extensive guide, so it can really give you some depth and detailed thinking around this.
That's
Cool.
great. Thank you. Lisa.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think it's to what Giovanni said, in terms of the language of risk. It's also the risk of falling behind where the rest of the world is going. It's not just about your internal risks, which are significant and are important to the success of the whole program. But if the world is moving in the direction on the E side towards certain kind of carbon goals by the year 2030, and your company is doing nothing about it, and your company actually has an opportunity to do something and is choosing not to prioritize that, the company is going to fall behind. And that's a big risk, right? So it's a one way of looking at it, about if we don't do certain things where the rest of the world is headed, or where our competitors or our peers, or where our employees want us to go, there's that risk as well. And also on the employee side, you've got new employees coming out, coming through the ranks, coming out of colleges or schools into your organizations. They want to see certain things. They care about certain things.
Yep.
And the risk of not talking about certain kinds of risks, marginalizing them because they're not good, they're not perhaps going directly to your bottom line, is a risk in of itself. It's going to be hard to attract and retain and maintain and promote and all of that. So that's just another way of looking at it, is the risk of living in this world, in the community, and the voices of those around your organization, and how that influences some of the ways that you speak to the board and to the management and to the employees.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I know the Edelman Trust Barometer has been used to sort of back up some of the very points that you're making, which is, that employees and future employees are going to companies that are aligned with their values, aligned with, what bettering the world, all of those things. So that's a good point that people can check out, is that Trust Barometer. And I'd love to hear whether anyone else has kind of some data points behind, that people are, those points that Lisa just made, people are moving to organizations that are doing the right thing, and looking at that in comparison to your peers. Rodolfo, you were going to
just to make a little bit easier the discussion about risks and opportunities, because we talk about with clients about the need for ESG to be part of the ERM for the company, doing overall risk analysis of the company. But also we talk to them all the time about the opportunities that are being offered in the market because of the transition to this new economy. So if we just flip those risks and you position yourself, you're basically taking advantage of the opportunity. So it's part of the same kind of discussion. And if you want to know specifically how we have perceived in the market that this is happening, is talent acquisition and retention. That's one side of this that is allowing companies to better position themselves and then become more competitive versus others getting behind. It's access to business opportunities that you might even see this as B2B clients being willing to work more with companies and vendors that are aligned in terms of ESG strategy than others that are not. And the third point is access to capital, which translates into cost of capital. These are the three factors that have been basically how this has been translating to companies in terms of the risks that they're facing, and if they're positioned themselves the right ways as leaders in the space, they are basically taking advantage of these three factors to basically have a better competitive position in the market, and in the end drive additional profits for the organization, additional value to the organization.
To Asha's point, what I would add in here is there's this bizarre sort of myopic thinking at the top, and it's like we think it's so hard to translate what we're talking about into the bottom line impact. Well, we were talking about this yesterday, but we've been riding in the Tour de France with half empty tires. We've been pedaling extra hard because the level of employee engagement is way lower than it should be. It's like an average of 70%, 70% of the gas pedal is being pushed down from an employee base. Our average turnover is 15 to 20%. There is a ton of cost that goes along with that. Well, to the extent that labor mobility is higher, to the extent that the Great Resignation is a real thing, to the extent that people are more willing to vote with their feet and move somewhere else, those costs are only going to increase. And so to the extent we can start living out our values, to the extent we can start closing that gap between our aspirational and actual culture, and start really putting forth a workplace that's going to resonate with the new generation and the old generation, everybody that's working in our workforce, that all falls to the bottom line. So that is, regardless of who's at the top of your organization, whether it's somebody who is altruistic and just naturally gets everything we're talking about, or it's the sort of dollar focused, Milton Friedman types, there's got to be a way to speak their language to get the tailwinds you need and the dollars you need to make these ideas that we're talking about, today and over the last couple of days, a reality in your organization.
Yeah, and I think the important point that underlies everything that you just said was, you need to understand your business's drivers, and be at the table with the individuals who can tell you how you can get traction on efforts that, at the end of the day, most people do want to do. It's a matter of whether they are able to and have the right methodologies and tools to be able to do the right thing, which kind of brings me to the next question that I saw came up a good bit. And Karen, were you going to speak to that before I move to another question? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I was just going to add a little bit to that in terms of, retain, being able to attract top talent, right? So people do care, right? So at the end of the day, we're trying to avoid people always, whatever they're doing, moving from job to job, but people are being selective in terms of, what company do I want to work for, right? Do they meet the value, are they, are they in line with my own values, right? And people are really considering those things, right? So to me, that's value creation, right? Because I'm bringing in really quality people. It's going to help promote my company, and it's going to help our company do really well. The other part of all this, you guys, right, around the value creation, right? Sometimes a lot of this stuff tightens us up a little bit, which creates innovation, right? So it's like, oh, we're not doing that great in some of these areas. Maybe we need to innovate, right? Maybe we need to start thinking about how we do things a little differently. And at the end of the day, that could save money, that could, drive new opportunities for people internally. So this isn't just a risk play. Yeah, risk is a really important component to this, right? We've got to be careful, right? We want to protect our brands, et cetera. But we also have the opportunity to innovate and move things forward and make it an exciting opportunity for everybody. So I just wanted to add that, because sometimes ESG, it's like this big burden and this big thing that we all have to deal with, right? But hey, there's some positive impacts here too that we can align with and feel really good about. So I just wanted to add that kind of feel good comment there. So thank you.
I love a good feel good comment. Thanks for that.
Okay, good. Yeah, I want everybody to be happy and innovated, and
Totally.
because at the end, we all have to be inspired. I've been doing this since like 2005 or something. I feel like, oh my God, what am I doing? It's like half my career I've been in this, right? And what keeps me coming back every day? I'm excited about it, right? And sometimes when we kind of hit a lull in our industry, it's like, oh no, it's over. We're never going to make it. And then something happens and something pops, right? And it's up to us as individuals to really keep that passion and energy around ESG,
Exactly.
to keep it going, right? So Anyway, that's my passionate statement for the day.
I love it.
I love it. I love a little feel good from Karen. Thank you.
There you go. Woohoo!
And Karen, I think the important thing is, like, if you step back and you look at ESG, right, it's about making sure we actually have an environment and a world in a few years to live in.
Exactly.
It's about making sure that world is inclusive and people feel valued and honored for who they are. And it's about holding people accountable if they aren't, honoring those things. And at the end of the day, that is the ES and the G. And it is something that should energize us all, because it, for lack of a better term, makes the world a better place.
And I think so many
humans rule. We have the power to do whatever we need to do, right? So let's make it happen.
Yeah, and we should have the confidence to get excited about it, because everything Asha just said resonates with every single human being that I've ever met. And it's time for us to bring that into our workplaces, where we spend so much of our day and we spend so much of our time, because we can really be a massive change, a massive force for good in the world. So
that's right.
And to the extent we have to persuade people, 80% of persuasion is a transference of emotion. So if you're actually excited by this stuff, if you're actually in this game because you want to make the world better, you want to make your workplace better, all those kinds of things, have the confidence to push that out. That's very infectious, and it can really drive a lot of massive change in your workplace and in the world,
So can we stay on that for a second? And Asha, feel free to say, no, we have better questions.
Mute him if you want.
Go ahead. You got the control here. But like, in a certain sense, this thing that we're talking about with ESG, it's a lot of opportunity. It's an opportunity to step up in our career and grab the reins instead of someone saying, here's another 20 grand for your budget. It's an opportunity for us to bring our organization together around our mission, around ethical action in a bunch of different ways. It's an opportunity for us to have a bigger, impact on our organization. I'd love to hear from the panel, how different do you think that is from the bulk of things that we're doing in a compliance function? Because I think, to a certain extent, risk and opportunity is always tied together, right? They're always tied, but a lot of times we focus on the risk piece. We got to get this done. Fine, there's a regulation, so I got budget for that, but nothing more than that. And this feels like it feels like a phase shift. It's a phase shift that I think is welcome in our industry, and the leadership that it's bringing to us, and the seat at the strategy table that it's going to offer us is great. But it feels a little bit different from, okay, let's kind of, no one on this call, but in a bad compliance department, let's just check the box and get the minimal amount that we need. I'd love to hear, do you feel like this discussion of opportunity takes a little bit of, a need for us to be like, I'm always excited about this stuff because I see that managing that risk takes care of people and achieves our mission. But you might have to kind of turn it out its head a little bit and get into a little bit of mind space to push this as an opportunity through to the other organization, because maybe people aren't used to you coming in and knocking on their door and saying, hey, it's Mr. or Ms. Compliance with a new opportunity for you. Anybody? Is this different, or is it kind of all of compliance opportunity?
I'm happy to answer if no one.
Yeah, Asha, why don't you get us started?
If no one else does. I like how this has shifted from me asking questions to you. That's great.
Yeah, just sit back.
No, I mean, I think interesting what, Lee, as you were talking, what resonated with me was you said, is it different from what we're doing? I think that's a different question than is it different from what we should be doing? And I think that is the way I would phrase it, because compliance and ethics should be both a risk management strategy and a culture building opportunity. And so we should be considering what we do now as both. And I think, that shift from strictly the compliance world to the ethics and compliance world kind of enabled that mentality that we can't metrics or rule everything into good conduct, right? And so we really need to motivate people to say, look, don't you want to work at a place that has a good culture? Don't you, want to make sure that people feel welcome? And that's the ethics part, the how people treat each other when no one's watching, the actions that we take when there isn't a rule that we know of or haven't read, right? And that's the opportunity that we have for psychological safety within our organization, and trust, quite frankly, that we're going to obtain that culture, maintain that culture, and hold people accountable to that. And there is so much opportunity. So I think if that's not the way we're thinking about what we do now, we have to think about it going forward.
Love it, Asha.
So here's another question about ESG, and this is where I was going to ask is, there were a lot of questions about who manages it, right? And I think, that was a bit of sort of where the conversation was going is, like this is an opportunity for us to do a lot of things, but there may be some people on this call that there's some people who may be able to step up and own it. There's some people that maybe hand it to, or there may be some people who are like, who is the proper owner of ESG strategy, of programs, and of reporting? And I've said this time and time again, I think oftentimes we start with the report, and that's been a lot of the focus in the market when we don't talk about the strategy and the program that the output is the report. So should there be an owner? Is this something we in ethics and compliance should say, let's expand my scope even more than it's already expanded to do? Or how should we suggest our companies, staff, or approach ESG efforts if we were to go to someone and say, I have an idea?
I'm happy to start. Oh, Rodolfo has his hand up. Rodolfo, I'll just throw in a couple of things. So I think, we're all talking cross-functional, right? So this thing is broad. It's an octopus, right? It touches everything, right? So from a Navics global perspective, we've been dealing with ethics and compliance people for a long time, right? Professionals. And so we're kind of leaning towards, maybe compliance needs to own this. I think that's still up in the air, right? Because there are really good qualified people to own this, but who should own it? I don't know. It's still up in the air. I think compliance is a good partner. I'm not sure they should own it unless it's regulated. And I think we're moving towards regulation. And I think that's why we're all leaning towards compliance. But compliance is going to have, right, partners across the organization. So maybe it is an ESG committee. Maybe if you don't have anything in place, maybe you start with the compliance person, maybe brings together an ESG committee. If you already have a sustainability team in place, right? Maybe the chief sustainability officer should own it and then partner with compliance. So, it depends on the organization and how mature you are in this area. And then you can determine what those best next steps are. Unfortunately, there's no one answer today, right? But things to think about internally in terms of, what you've done in the past. Are you just getting started today, or are you pretty mature in your program? If you are pretty mature in your program, somebody likely owns some aspect of it. They may own like 70%, but maybe 30% is still missing. So they need to partner with maybe the ethics and compliance team to bring it all together for the company. So those are my thoughts in terms of who should own it.
Yeah, Rodolfo?
Sure, I can jump in also. And it's in line with what Karen has just said. What I can say is this: we help companies even put together some of these governance structures for them. Based on the experience that we have, the first thing that I would say is basically who owns it? The board. That's the expectation from the owners of the business and from shareholders. That's step one. Step two, who managed it? And there is a level at the board that you can have a committee, you can have separate functions inside the board, but then there is a level at management. At the management level, our experience, which is in line with what Karen is discussing, is that there was some movement in terms of who has been leading the effort. In some companies, we're going to have the chief sustainability officer function that, by the way, is completely useless if it's siloed. And the only reason why the person is there basically for reporting reasons, gather data, or some charitable work that the company does. So it's completely siloed and not really effective in terms of managing risk. You have other situations that I've seen more and more GC/compliance begin to get heavily involved and begin to take a leadership position in the company. The best situations that I've seen up to this point with clients is when you having a leadership position, like a chief sustainability officer, or having the GC leading the effort, but having a steering committee at the management level that is basically helps understand how ESG and sustainability basically get into each one of the functions of the company, it has been the best way to try to manage this. One of our clients, for example, they have a chief sustainability officer function, but the people that work for her are allocated in many different positions inside the operations of the company. So there's a client that was deciding where they should put the new plant, and they were deciding between the West Coast and New Jersey. And in the end, the decision came to the part, in part was cost, but another portion of that was sustainability related. They were thinking about the emissions that they would generate if they installed the plant in the West Coast, which would be close to their suppliers, versus the East Coast, that would be closer to the consumer base. So, and this was just part of the natural discussion. It was part of the process when they were evaluating the new plant, and not a separate function at the company that would, after there is a decision made in terms of cost, somebody else would basically go in and trying to make another layer of decision related to the environmental piece. So it's just saying that the best structure, boards own, there is a leadership position within management, but there is also a committee, because this touch different functions inside the organization. They have to be understood that that's the process to manage it.
Yes, Nicholas.
Hey there. Thought I was in trouble there.
I use your full name.
Yeah, I know. Okay. So I just to kind of argue a little bit, or play devil's advocate a little bit, I would argue that ethics and compliance is in a really unique position, because we're kind of the circulatory system of the organization. We touch all these different divisions and all these different departments, and we're uniquely not only positioned, but like we're uniquely adept at translating these broad pronouncements into what matters for our business. So that's why we get so excited about this. Of course, there's probably a sustainability department. There's probably a safety department, depending on what your organization is. There might be a diversity and inclusion officer inside the HR function. But given our role of being the circulatory system, it's kind of like asking what system in your body is responsible for keeping the body alive. I mean, is it the heart? Is it the brain? Is it what delivers nutrients to the different parts of your body and the different organs? I would argue it's more the latter than any of the others. So it's a unique position that we're in. And again, to Rodolfo's point and to Karen's point, it kind of depends on what the politics are in your organization and what departments sort of exist and what kind of level of maturity you guys have toward the, actualization of your sort of ideal ESG initiative or your ideal ESG sort of manifestation in your corner of the world. But we just have a unique position given the fact that, think about how ethics and compliance started. Somebody smart in the legal department probably said, hey, figure out what all this compliance stuff is. And somebody smart who cared rolled their sleeves up and figured it out. And now there's there's societies like this, and there's there are departments in our organizations that are going concerns for this thing. Well, those same tailwinds are at play right now with the ESG thing, and it's an opportunity for us to wrangle these things together and pull these data, this information from these various data pools and these various systems that exist in our organization, and provide some of the structure and the amorphousness that is ESG at this nascent stage of the game.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I think as long as you didn't say who owns culture, we can talk about that conversation. I like your what keeps the body alive analogy. But I think, you're right. The point is we should be getting it done, and we are experienced. And, again, go back to the code of conduct, is there are a lot of risk areas in there that we don't necessarily own, but we hold accountable the entire organization to those risk areas. And it's similar with ESG efforts, because, we've talked about the SEC's increased focus on climate disclosures. All of those things are going to come into account as to where is the accountability to make sure the things that we actually do report out are being done, they're accurate, and all of those things. Okay, there's a question from the audience that says, if CSR owns the ESG program, what should the compliance role be? Can you provide actionable examples?
This hand is up from before, so I'm going to pull my hand down for this one.
Well, all right. Well, I'll jump in. I think it's kind of like getting where you fit in. Like, I think that if you're on the ESG committee, or if you're influencing that, like, get in where you can. And, this is kind of like you got to work yourself into a promotion here a little bit, and it's a promotion into a job that's not really there or whatever. But I mean, a lot of times you get a promotion because you outshine and you say, hey, can I take something extra on? Or I'm doing great at this, give me another project. And, I think I would probably start from the back end of ESG and say, hey, what are we doing on governance? Hey, can I see your report? CSR. Okay, well, CSR is probably heavy in the S piece, so they may already be asking you about, your e-learning stats or something like that, and maybe what reports you're getting to your hotline. So I mean, how about this? I would either start at, hey, let me take over the G of this ESG. Like, you should probably have, EHS run the E part, but let me take over the G. Or, let's say CSR is running it. They're probably focused heavily on that S. You might go in and say, hey, I'd love to help you with this. Like, who doesn't like someone walking into their office or knocking on their Zoom door or whatever and saying, hey, can I do some of your job for you? And just say, hey, you know what? You're interested in S, right? You're CSR. You're probably interested in a bunch of these things. You asked about this one thing last year. I gave that to you, hopefully on time and all of that. I'm actually tracking a bunch of other stuff because I care about, the social as well. So here are some stats that I could give you. I run these monthly or quarterly or whatever. What if I beef up the thing that you care most about? And if you like that, I got some more of it for you. So I say this slowly, everyone, because I get what ENC is like. I've never met an ENC pro who has too much budget and too much time on their hands. We got a bunch of stuff going on, right? So we got a bunch of stuff going on. We're trying to take care of every action that every employee in the company makes, and then some vendors and all that. So I don't say it lightly, but also find out how you could carve out an hour this month or something and be like, I'm going to just pull some of my metrics that seem relevant to this person and send it to them, and then get it going, because the door is open here. Like, the door isn't packed with 80 people trying to get on the ESG committee. So you can kind of lob something in there, and then, it's very easy to stand out on this right now in this era, because that committee meeting doesn't have a list as long as your arm of people who are dying to be on the ESG committee. They're like, well, let's try to kind of get this and see if that's enough. So I would just kind of jump in. I would kind of start with what they care about most, probably S if it's CSR, and or kind of say, hey, you probably don't have as much insight into governance. We do a lot of that stuff. So let me tell you what we do for conflicts of interest, and let me tell you what we do for, this fraud prevention or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, I was just going to say briefly that I agree with everything everyone has said on the role of compliance, but I still think ultimately this is owned by, or needs to be owned by, those who make the budget decisions, because ultimately it comes down to what are the top priorities? What do the investors care about? What do the customers care about or want us to care about as a company? And where are we going to put the money? Where are we going to put the investments? So I don't think that the compliance person is the one making those decisions. Ultimately, when you've got to prioritize, especially companies that are in a less mature stage of ESG, they're in the position where they've got to prioritize, where are we going to put our focus this year, next year, the year after? And somebody's going to has to make that budget decision, because you can come up with all the greatest ideas and then, not get that approval. So all of this is just to say, well, I think compliance plays a huge role for all the reasons everyone's mentioned. Ultimately, I still think it's owned by, whether it's the board or the CEO or the president or whoever it is who's making the big investment decisions.
That's great. Karen, you were going to add to that?
Sure. I'm just going to go back to the CSR. So I mentioned, I had a company, corporate social responsibility software, CSRware, right? Because back in the old days, that's all we had. So a lot of times we do have, CSR teams that are driving this because they've been around for a long time, dealing with philanthropic things within the company. The social side as well. And sometimes the environmental piece, right? Because they had to pull together the CSR reports for years. But I would say that it's a good partnership between CSR and compliance, right? Because compliance is going to focus more on hey, there's some regulations going on, right, in the EU, and we're looking at the SEC potentially moving forward with regulations. CSR is like, well, that's not my expertise, right? My expertise is, looking at corporate social responsibility, make sure we're a good citizen, right? We're a steward of the planet, et cetera. But I'm not really focused too much on regulatory stuff, right? So you guys together, right, you can bring that expertise together, and that will create a really powerful ESG program. So I would kind of look at it that way. And then to Lisa's point about budget, absolutely, who owns the budget? Well, don't put it under the CFO. I don't think we'll ever get anywhere because they ultimately own the budget. But we need someone who owns the budget that can make it actionable, right? So yeah, is it the COO? I mean, it does have to be at a high level, but hopefully you have some chief of something that is overseeing ESG, and that will allow for justification around budget and additional resources required. Not an easy thing to overcome, but I'm with Lisa. You know, budget is important because we do need to allocate things, but having it at the board level, Rodolfo, I agree. The board needs to be behind it 100%, but they're not going to own it, right? They can't operationalize it. They can't tell the company. I mean, I guess you could tell the company what to do, but you need someone internal, I think, that partners with the board that can then communicate what the relevance is and the importance so that they can drive internal backing and support around it. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
There's always money for the things that are important, just like there's always time for the people that are important. And we can influence those things if we're persuasive enough and we can make the right case. So sorry to jump in there.
There you go. Yep. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rodolfo.
I can jump in just to make a quick comment on the, if you think about the way that I've seen compliance playing a bigger role in each one of the companies that we have been serving. First part, there is a huge movement into additional regulation and also mandates in terms of disclosure impact in Europe, and is going to impact even more here in the US in the near future. As a result of that and that's part of this transition into GC compliance of the ESG functions. That's part one of the process. The second thing is that some of our clients are more sophisticated already into the ESG journey. They begin to realize how important compliance is inside each one of the programs. We have clients that basically incorporate kind of a culture of compliance for each one of the aspects of their social and environmental investments. In the core behind it is that they want to make sure that they drive specifically the outcomes that they desire from the investments they're making. One client, for example, that I mentioned yesterday on charitable donations during the COVID time, that were basically even like sending money for hospitals so that they could put more beds available for patients. They added not only compliance, but also their external auditors in the whole process to make sure that every dollar they would give would be used exactly the way that they were supposed to be used based on the contract that was signed with each one of these entities that were making the donations, which is different from what I've seen in the past, that people just give a lump sum to a charitable organization and just use the cash the way that you see fit, because it's kind of in line with what we believe is the right thing. And they have been really driving really good outcomes for the investments they're making, and they can report to their stakeholders some of the data about how they're feeling the benefits from all these investments in compliance and in tracking all this information. So just saying that there is additional roles, and there is it's not just because of regulation, but there is additional roles that can be played by compliance officers in the process.
Yeah, and I think one of the if I'll just add another point to this discussion as well, we have some foundational elements that have developed over time. We now have the evaluation of the corporate compliance program. We had the federal sentencing guidelines for organizations. We have spent a lot of time. I mean, someone was talking earlier about organizations like ECI, who will be celebrating 100 years next year, right? We have been iterating on what makes a successful program, and ethical culture and risk management and regulatory management. And, there's some kind of mix between policies and procedures and risk assessments and, now ESG materiality assessments. So there's some structural things that we can really lean on that haven't been in place in some of the functions like CSR and even in human resources to really strengthen wherever our company's program is. Use some of where's the data, right? We talk about data. And, our three questions are, does it work? Have you looked at, does it work? And I think thinking about those things within the ESG framework could benefit whoever owns it from a programmatic basis.
Right.
All right. Well, we are almost up on time. I want to just give anyone sort of a last final opportunity to share with this crowd kind of, what should they do when they get off this call? What's next? If you were to give kind of one sentence all of the panelists of advice to everyone on here as to what they should do as far as ESG, what would it be? And I'm holding you to one sentence.
Oof.
Rodolfo, you go first.
So like this,
On the spot.
yeah. I think the main message that we give to everybody, and that's a big way that compliance can play a role in this process of ESG, is this. ESG is not just disclosure of information and communication piece or in the market saying that, as was in the past, maybe 5-7 years ago, that we just say, I love green, or I love green, here's a data dump of numbers that showcase that I'm basically evolving in my commitments, like because I have less emissions than I had before, the emissions per employees, or whatever the data that was. The thing about the programs is nowadays, and that's the way that the shareholders are looking at the company, is basically this. Is there a governance structure around the programs? Are the companies really prepared to face an evolving environment? Because E&S are moving targets. What is good today is not going to be the same maybe a year from now, 2 years from now. Are companies prepared to address all these evolving facts that are going to be presented to them? And you can only have that if you have a strong governance structure behind any kind of ESG program. So, and that's a big role of compliance, and the compliance officers can play inside this environment. So just a key message that be part of the process, and it is a strong component. Governance is key to the evolution of ESG, and I believe that you can play a great role in this process.
Awesome. I'm going to give you a little bit of grace because that was a long sentence, but you
That was one paragraph, maybe. That was perhaps
Yeah.
one thought.
I heard a lot of commas and semicolons.
I'm with you, Karen. Not a period in that sentence. That was one sentence.
You went first. I think it was.
I tried not to breathe in the while I was speaking.
No.
You're all good, man.
That was great. That was
All
great.
good.
All right. Lisa, what about you? What's your one sentence? Yep, you got to come off mute though.
Sorry, one sentence. I would say figure out what you care as a company, what you care about most, and dive into what you care about most. And even more importantly, listen to your employees, because they've got a lot of things to tell you. It'll help the program.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
I would say be the change you want to see and drive that change forward.
Nick, that was good.
Thank you. That was short. That was like a couple of words. Okay.
That was a tagline.
Exactly.
Giovanni, what about you?
I'd say figure out what you already have a handle on that's related to this and offer it to somebody who cares, whether it's an existing committee or just your exec or your boss or whatever. Start with where you are and jump in. It's not going to be that hard. So get started.
Love it.
Awesome. Desiree, what about you? Your one sentence.
Thanks. Yeah, no, so I mean, I echo what others have said, but and also just, keeping a close eye on upcoming regulations, both in the US at the SEC as well as internationally, because it's particularly in the EU, because they have the potential to impact US companies too. So just keeping a close eye on what's coming up.
That's awesome. Karen, close us.
Sure. I would establish, find out who's doing sustainability, ESG, CSR within your company, and align with them, partner with them to move your program forward. That's what I would do.
That's awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. I think what I would say is, if you haven't started, start. If you're on the journey, find out how long your road is and where you want to get to find that sort of end goal that you want to make. And also, speak your organization's love language. I guess I have sentences, huh?
Love that.
Speak your organization's love language in advocating and articulating the importance of ESG. So with that, thank you to all my esteemed panelists.
Oh, Asha, can we
How about a round of applause
Holly?
for Asha?
Oh,
great panel. Oh, did we forget Holly?
Okay,
This round of applause is still coming, Asha. You did a great job
wait,
with this.
one more. Okay, go Holly, please.
It's okay, no worries. I can be short, one sentence. Trust and transparency with your employees and communicate that and be vulnerable. Because if you're not vulnerable, they won't trust you. And if you're not transparent, they won't trust you either. That's it.
Love that.
And
Round of applause
Awesome.
for
Glad we
Asha.
didn't miss that. Yeah, Asha, nice
Great,
job.
great hosting. This is a hard job. You did a great job wrangling all these
Yeah.
cats here. So nice job.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Anyway, I just wanted to close out this session and thank all of our sponsors and our lead sponsor, Convercent by OneTrust, for having this program for the past 2 days. Again, just some housekeeping so that everyone is aware, we have the CEU credit certificates will be sent over to you via email. The sessions will be on demand. Alyssa posted that. She'll get them up by the end of the week. And to access those, go to ethics.org/events. And you will see that ECI is having 2 upcoming events, November 18th on Speaking Up, Listen Up, as well as an event on December 2nd, which is about our multinational working paper. And I want to just say thank you so much to our sponsor. Oh, wait, one more housekeeping. We will have a survey right after this event sent to all of you. So please fill it out. It just helps us, plan for our events and make them more engaging and interactive as this one was. And I want to give a special shout out to Nadine Ferlazzo for, her vision for this event the past 2 days and for trusting, for us to all come together. I think this is the most that I've seen many of you in the room and stayed. So this is exciting that the discussion, the speakers, and the experience that you all shared is a true testament of what Nadine's vision was. So thank you, Nadine, and especially Alyssa. She is the producer for all of our events, and many of you know her. She keeps everything running, a well-oiled machine. But overall, thank you so much to all of our sponsors, Convercent by OneTrust, CAQ, FTI Consulting, Navex Global, Vault Platform, and Compliance Line. And I suspect that Nick's going to talk about love language on his next post.
I'm going to have to now. Yeah. Hat tip to you. Okay.
But
as long as he tags me, it's okay.
All right.
Thank you so much. Please do connect with one another via LinkedIn. I think Nick is with all the speakers. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Fly safe, Asha.